G'day guys, we're here at Tough Dog Suspension today for the install of the Everest, which you guys hopefully are following as a build. I've managed to corner Dave Cook from Tough Dog, and we're about to talk about suspension. I've got a few questions I'm going to ask him. How you going, Dave?
Mate, fantastic. Thanks for popping along.
Thanks for having us here today. Now I'd like to ask you a couple of questions. First of all, the suspension install on a modern vehicle like the Everest, is it a lot different to a traditional install? And is it something people should attempt, and why?
Mate, absolutely. It is completely different these days. The cars have changed a lot since the beginning of suspension installs and the beginning of vehicles here in Australia. So starting out, we used to have a sledgehammer type approach with leaf springs and live axle coil springs. Getting it right was fairly easy. Whereas with modern cars, we're talking about things with much finer tolerances, and there's a heck of a lot more sensors, lines and etc. that can get in the way in a suspension install. The second thing that I would recommend is that anyone trying this, whether they're going to try it at home or get someone to install it, is to make sure they use a hoist, because the rear leaf springs can be really heavy in a modern dual cab ute, and the front end of the car, you need as much working room as you can to get that strut in and out.
Okay, fantastic. And if you were looking to install suspension these days, there's a lot of brands that are out on the market and a lot of choice, which can be confusing for people. What's your advice for somebody that's looking to put some suspension in their vehicle?
Absolutely. Look, it can be really confusing when you're looking for suspension on the market these days. There's more marketing terminology than you can possibly poke a stick at, and there are more companies thinking that they know what they're doing than you can poke a stick at as well. What I would suggest is, regardless of what brand you go with, pick someone that you're comfortable with and use their gear from start to finish. So if you're going to start with a Tough Dog kit, finish with a Tough Dog kit. When you start mixing and matching, that kit has been designed to work as a complete unit. So when you mix and match, you're not going to get the best out of your vehicle.
Fantastic. And as far as suspension install, what should people do before they decide to buy and install a kit?
Sure. So setting up your vehicle is a huge investment. And so what I would suggest is that people plan it out and start with the accessories. Suspension is all about carrying and controlling the load that's on the car. Now, every time you or the vehicle owner changes that suspension load, we're changing what suspension is going to be appropriate to carry that load and control it correctly out on the tracks. So you've got to plan your vehicle out and make sure you put the accessories on so that whoever you go to for your suspension can pick the right spring and shock combination for your particular setup.
Okay. And given that you've just mentioned weight as a key component to get right before someone comes to install a kit, the next question that comes up, most of us as four-wheel drivers will think we've got our setup right, and then we'll go and take a trip and we'll do something different. So for example, we think drawers are a great idea, we go and take them somewhere, realise the weights that's involved, and we might pull them out. What's the point, or where do you think people need to look at adjusting, or what are the key triggers for looking at adjusting your setup once you've got it right the first time?
In a modern vehicle, any major change to the accessories that are on the car will trigger a review of the suspension. So if you add a drawer system or you take one out, that's a substantial amount of weight that's being removed from the car. Whether or not it's going to mean a change, I couldn't tell you, because there are too many variables involved, but you should definitely have someone who really knows what they're looking at look over the car. And of course, there's also the gut feel of it. If you don't think that your car is riding as well as a result of the change that you've made, then have someone look over it and make sure that everything is within the tolerances that it should be.
Okay, awesome. And I'm sure this next question is one that's probably you get a million times a day, but there's some people that have variables. Cars more often than not are being used as multi-purpose, which is probably why we see the rise of utes and things coming in, because they can be the tradie car on the weekend, and then they can drive the family around and they can also go off-road.
Yep.
You're going to have people that want their cake and eat it too. What's the advice where it's going to have a particular weight set up at one point, but then you're going to be using a different sort of setup of weight, whether it's towing or something else? How do you recommend people work with the right suspension, given that they're going to have different uses and different weights at different times?
Yeah, sure. So the front end of the car, we're going to set that up based on the accessories that are on the car. But fortunately, that's the end that doesn't really change too much. You put your bar and your winch on, and that's about all the weight you've got. In the back end of the car, as you say, people go from zero to fully loaded, towing, etc., etc. There's heaps of changes that people can make with their suspension. Now, the key there is to put the steel spring, as in the leaf spring or the coil spring in your case, in that suits the load that's constantly on the car, and then use an airbag product, which is essentially a variable spring, to change how the weight is controlled in the back of the car when it comes on and off. So for instance, in this car, you've told us that you're doing just a little bit of towing. We've gone with our 0 to 300 kilo spring because the variance isn't there. If you had brought this car to us with a draw system and so on, and then said you were towing as well, we would have gone for that constant 300 kilo spring, because more often than not, you're going to be in that sort of 250 to 300 kilos all the time on the back of the car. The key takeaway there is the spring needs to be for the minimum load, and then the airbag takes up the slack in that variance.
Okay, fantastic. And how long should suspension last? There's a lot of vehicles out there, and I know we insure a lot of vehicles that are older. What's the sort of point? Is there a rate in life, or what would you say are the indicators that someone might need to look at their suspension setup?
Well, look, every vehicle's different and every user is different as well. If you're going to be punishing your car, you can't expect it to last as long as someone who's just doing a once-a-year trip or very, very light weekend work. The rule of thumb used to be about 100,000 kilometres out of a shock absorber, but that was when the shock absorber was not the load-bearing component in the suspension. In the front end of vehicles today, that lower I-ring takes every single kilogram of the vehicle's weight as it runs through the on and off-road driving conditions. So that lower I-ring probably isn't going to last quite that full 100,000. We run a 3-year unlimited K warranty on our cars, and I would say that your bushes are probably realistically going to last between 60 and 100,000 Ks depending on usage. But of course that bush, that's a wear and tear item and it should be checked all the time as well. The way to tell when your suspension is starting to keel over though is much easier than all of that. When you hit a bump, the suspension should cycle once and then start to move smoothly. If it starts to recycle over and over after you hit a bump, say 2 or 3 times, and it just can't resettle, chances are your shocks need looking at.
Okay. Also, and there's plenty of providers out there from a suspension perspective that people can choose from. What are the things that you would look for if you were buying suspension from the provider? What's the difference between someone that's going to do a good job for you and someone who's just selling you a kit?
If you walk into a shop, regardless of whose shop it is, and you say, "Could I get a suspension kit, please?" and they say, "Yeah, sure, here's your quote," chances are you're in the wrong shop. You want to be talking to someone who's going to take the time to know about your vehicle and how you use it and match the suspension to suit that usage. So someone who takes the time to ask the questions about what accessories you've got, what accessories you're going to have, and how you use that vehicle, that's the first starting point. And the second part of it, of course, is the pedigree in the research and development of the company that you're looking at. So we've done 35 years worth of suspension development here as Tough Dog. And what you'll find with some companies on the market is that they've had a lesser amount of time, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but they haven't gone through that learning curve. So having someone where you know that they've got that track record on the board and they're prepared to back it up with a quality warranty, that's where you know that you're in the right place.
You're obviously installing upper control arms today.
Yes.
They're a bit of a newer product to the market, obviously designed for IFS. I've heard different things about when they should and shouldn't be installed, and as far as a lift goes. Can you give us your take on why they're important and when they should go on the car?
Absolutely. In my opinion, they should go on any car that's going to be used in heavy off-roading or where the lift has come up that full 50 mil. You can get away in a lift kit without doing it. We've only been selling upper control arms for a few months now, and we've been selling lift kits for far longer than that. The problem, of course, is that you can only just get a wheel alignment. In some cars, you'll get a wheel alignment really easily, and in some cars, it's a lot more difficult. The tolerances in modern cars are a lot smaller than they used to be. And so having that ability to wheel align the car correctly and get the perfect alignment on the tyre will give you maximum tyre life. Now, although it's a more expensive thing and you need to add it in, long term with your tyre prices, you're actually going to save money because you'll get that full life out of the tyres.
So what does the installation of the upper control arm actually do?
So the upper control arm, what we've done is we've changed the angle that the ball joint sits on inside the arm. And what that does is it allows the car to bring back the caster and the camber to the OEM specs. So when you've lifted your car, the ball joint will actually be sitting on a slight angle. So you haven't got that full travel as the suspension goes up and down. What we've done is we've flattened that ball joint back out, which effectively re-zeros the alignment so you can use the full range of alignment that's built into the car.
Thanks very much for your time, Dave. Really appreciate it.
No worries, thanks for coming in.
If you'd like more information on Tough Dog, you can check them out at toughdog.com.au. And if you want to follow the Everest build, you can find us on Facebook, or you can also look us up on our website, club4x4.com.au, and click on the campfire. Thanks.